Hi, welcome back to Detective and Mystery Fiction. If you enjoy my content, please consider hitting the like button. It's the only way the YouTube algorithm notices me. Mr. Fortune's Trials by H.C. Bailey. Trial 6. Profiteers. First published London Magazine, September 1924. Mr. Fortune climbed heavily from the platform of Lausanne into the Paris Express. He had just finished a dinner of ceremony constructed by a Swiss chef. A compartment containing couchettes for 3 was reserved for him. "Yes, I shall want 'em all," he groaned, sat down upon one and unbuttoned his waistcoat. The usual noise of Lausanne station worked to its usual frantic finale. "I feel as if all that was happening inside me," said Mr. Fortune sadly. His host, the Lithuanian millionaire, Baron Lampe, rushed in, thrust upon him a mass of newspapers and novels, shook his hands violently, and darted out again to a fanfare of bells, whistles, and kinds of music. The train groaned and clattered and moved. "Praise God," said Mr. Fortune, and tried to do deep breathing exercises. His success in proving the Baron's daughter innocent of the assault on the abominable Romanian fiddler had roused Baron Lampe to dreadful hospitality. Mr. Fortune obtained a bottle of Vichy water and sipped it and looked with dull eyes at the mass of literature. Not till the train had laboured up to Pontarlier and the French custom officers had looked into his dressing case and gone did he feel well enough to read. The train gathered speed, and cool mountain air brought to him the scent of pines. He got into his pyjamas and lay down with a Paris paper. Among its strange English news, he found something headed, "A Mysterious Death, Enigma of a War Millionaire." What followed was a French journalist's attempt to make a short story of the report of an English inquest. Sir Doughty, Chevalier of the British Empire, became rich as Croesus in the war, then bebought the Château de Douty, the home of his ancestors. Before ever he lived in it, he was found dead in the park. The earth from which his family grew, it received him and killed him. Sir Doughty had never been ill, strong as Hercules, all his friends say. No sign of an attack upon him, no violence. But he lay dead. What then? The doctors talk of shock, of a paralysis of the nerves. Anyhow, he is dead, this Croesus of the war. A blow of fate. Why can't our papers write like that? Mr. Fortune smiled and turned over and went to sleep. He stayed in Paris to restore the self-respect of his digestion. The enigma of that improbable Englishman, Sir Doughty of the Château de Douty, was forgotten with the other queer dreams of the night in the train. The morning after he came back to London, Superintendent Bell rang up from Scotland Yard to ask if he was at home. "My body is at home, Bell," said Mr. Fortune sadly. "My soul is in the Bois de Boulogne. Which did you want?" Superintendent Bell would come round at once. "Good morning, sir. You made a wonderful thing of that Swiss affair. You're looking very well, Mr. Fortune. Bright and beautiful as ever, Bell. But why this soft soap?" Superintendent Bell smiled. "Well, sir, I am glad to see you, and that's a fact. There's a queer little case away in Lancashire. Maybe it isn't anything. But they've called us in, and I don't see my way. The jury made it natural death." Mr. Fortune sat up in his chair. "Oh, my aunt," he said. "Sir Doughty of the Château de Douty." "Anything about a chateau, sir? He isn't a Frenchman, but you've got the name all right. Sir John Doughty, KBE, that's the man. And who was Sir Doughty, Chevalier of the British Empire? What you might call a profiteer. He came of a very old Lancashire family, they say, but he was a workhouse boy. When the war began, he was a cotton broker in Liverpool, small business and rather shady. He did well out of the cotton shortage in the war. He made a lot more buying and selling cotton mills in the boom after the war. They say his estate will work out at a couple of million. When he'd got his pile and his title, he looked about for a country place, and he took it into his head to buy the old family home, restoring the ancient glories of the Doughtys. That's the idea, sir. So he bought Mims Hall. It's a queer place, An hour out of Manchester, stuck in the middle of collieries. It's old enough and has a bit of a scrubby park, but you wouldn't think a rich man would want H for a country house. It's been empty this long time. The Doughties went broke and went under 200 years ago. It passed through a lot of hands. Nowadays, nobody wants to live in it. Last owner, an old lady in Cheltenham. She couldn't let and couldn't sell till Sir John Doughty snapped at it. They say he paid through the nose, which isn't like him, and he spent thousands doing it up. I suppose he was the heir of the old family. I suppose he thought he was, or wanted people to think he was. You get that kind of swank, sir. Oh, it must have been the family name made him buy it. The place is no sort of catch. Well, sir, he never lived in it after all. The builders made a long job, and he was always running over to see how they were getting on, and one day he was found dead in the park. No mess, no sign of violence, just dead. They were a bit quick with the inquest. The local doctor did the post-mortem. He said Sir John Doughty died from shock, syncope, paralysis of the nerves, kind of stroke. The verdict was death from natural causes. Yes. Where do we come in, Bell? Well, sir, I ask you, healthy man of 60 goes walking in a park and dies quick and sudden from shock. Is it likely? It could happen, said Mr. Fortune slowly. Who was the doctor? Dr. Enoch Ashton. Fortune reached for a medical directory. Yes. Oldish man. Quite good qualifications. Why don't you believe Dr. Enoch Ashton? Superintendent Bell coughed. Well, sir, the local police thought it was rather queer. He was known in Lancashire, you see, was John Doughty. And they didn't love him? No, I haven't heard of anybody who loved him. Not a nice man, sir. That's one of the things that made them suspicious. There's been a lot of talk. The police heard some of it and began to look about, and they sent it up to us. And what's it worth, Bell? Ah, that's what I want to know. Superintendent Bell rubbed his nose. First thing I said to myself when I read the inquest was, who gets his money? Well, it's his son, John Doughty Jr. That hit him up in Lancashire. They say the son is a chip of the old block, all out for money, lives hard and fast. He was partner with his father, but they quarrelled like sin. And the son gets $1 million or $2 by the father's death. But then the son was in London the day Sir John died. So whatever was done in the park, he didn't do it. If you believe the doctor, nothing was done. Superintendent Bell leaned forward. They're none so sure of the doctor, sir. He's always been straight, most respectable and all that. But he's got a pretty daughter, and old Sir John was rather a lad. I was telling you, Sir John was often about Mims Hall. Well, he saw Rachel Ashton, and he went after her. The doctor caught him one day and told him off proper. They've got evidence of that. But it would take something more than a row to stop the old man when he was after a girl. They think maybe the doctor caught him at it again and did him in. How? Said Mr. Fortune. That's what I'm asking you, sir. How many ways can a man die of shock? Fatal shock is generally caused by violence. But you say there wasn't any violence. Who found the body? Builders' men going home. The local constable saw it as it lay, all in a heap, no sign of a blow or struggle. Can't you have shock from some sort of row, sir? From mental or emotional stress? Yes, it can happen. But your Sir John Doughty don't sound highly mental or emotional. He was not, the superintendent agreed. A nasty old fellow, hard as nails. What do you think of it, sir? Mr. Lomas, he says we're wasting our time. The local police are making mares' nests for us. Yes, it could be. Mr. Fortune smiled. I feel I have a very open mind, Bell. There might have been disease. There might have been poison. The doctor is the unknown quantity. Did Dr. Ashton tell the truth? Did he know the truth? Do you want the body dug up, sir? You're very eager, Bell. I don't like it, sir. It looks nasty to me. I wonder, Mr. Fortune murmured. Not one of our simple cases. A lot of dark background. And something rather queer in the dark. No, I don't much like it, Bell. He started up and walked to the window and opened it wider. I wonder. No, I wouldn't dig up the body. Don't alarm Dr. Enoch Ashton just yet. Send me a full report of what he said at the inquest. The Mims Hall case is considered by Superintendent Bell and others to be one of Mr. Fortune's best. That is not his opinion. He complains that he never knew what was going to happen next. The next thing which did happen was Dr. Enoch Ashton. Dr. Ashton turned up in Wimpole Street at the unseemly hour of 9 p.m. Reggie Fortune was still at the dinner table, was looking wistfully at the last meringue when Dr. Ashton's card was set before him. He meditated over it through the fragrance of 2 cups of coffee and sighed and went to his consulting room. Dr. Ashton was a large man, like Punch in the Face, but with white whiskers. "Very good of you to see me, Mr. Fortune. It's rather pressing, and I want to consult the highest authority. I don't know if you've heard of Sir John Doughty's death." "Yes, I read the papers." Mr. Fortune looked dreamily at the sharp red face. "That's what's brought me here. I want your advice." "Yes. One moment. It's just possible I may have to consider the Doughty case officially. Advise the police, you know. Do you think you had better say anything to me?" "If it's in your hands, I'm satisfied," said Dr. Ashton heartily. "Sir Lawson Hunter told me to put myself in your hands." "Sir Lawson Hunter? Well, you couldn't have a better opinion, so you want to put all the facts before me?" "Everything," said Dr. Ashton. Reggie Fortune rose and gave him a cigar and one himself, then sighed relief and sank down into his chair. "And what did Sir Lawson Hunter think of Doughty's death?" "He said it was a damned queer case." "That was rather my notion," Reggie murmured. "So it is. But it's clear as daylight, Mr. Fortune. You read my evidence at the inquest. Well, that was absolutely accurate. There was no wound, no sign of violence. I could find no disease. He was a man of 60, and he'd lived freely, some traces of drink and profligacy, but nothing dangerous. His heart was sound, but there was very little blood in heart or brain. It had all gone down to the big veins. No blood in the heart or nerve centers," Reggie murmured. "No injury, and the man was dead. If that isn't death from shock, what is it? You found nothing else abnormal?" Dr. Ashton knit his brows. "Well, no. The surface veins were congested, of course. Just a faint red pattern in parts of the body. It looked like a drawing of trees in red." "Good Lord." Reggie sat up. "I've seen that in a man who had been struck by lightning. Heat stroke, too." "But there was no lightning." Dr. Ashton laughed impatiently. "It was a fine, cold April day." "I know. And he went a walk on that fine, cold day, and he tumbled down dead. Well, well. You have all the fads that I had. What would you have said was the cause of death, Mr. Fortune?" "Oh, shock, shock. But what shocked him?" "That's not my business. You can't tell that from a post-mortem." "No. And you haven't made a guess, Dr. Ashton?" Dr. Ashton flushed. "Ah, now you're coming to it," he said. "I suppose the police have been talking to you, Mr. Fortune. It's quite true I had words with Sir John Doughty. The fellow pestered my daughter and I warned him off. That was a week before he died. I didn't see the man from that time till they brought me to his dead body. But because the local police heard of that row they've ken prying round my house, questioning my servants, badgering me to account for all my movements on the day of the death, cross-examining me about what I really found in the body. It's a damnable business, Mr. Fortune. I've nothing to hide, and I've told you everything. I want to know if you're satisfied." "I see no reason to doubt anything you've said, Dr. Ashton." "Thanks," the doctor said dubiously. "I suppose that's all I could expect. I wish you could tell me these maddening inquiries would stop. I don't control the police, you know." "You mean they'll go on hunting for evidence?" "It is possible, Dr. Ashton. Then I wish you'd exhume the body and see for yourself. It's a serious thing to dig up a corpse." "Anything's better than this suspicion," Dr. Ashton cried. "Yes, very natural you should say so. I'll remember your wish." Dr. Ashton was shown out into the night, and Reggie stood watching him stride away. "I wonder," he said. "Oh Lord, it is dark." He is accustomed to make up his mind quickly. In the Mims Hall case, and this much distressed him, he had great difficulty in making it up about anything. Some days went by before he said a word to Scotland Yard. Then the chief of the Criminal Investigation Department rang him up. "Are you a ghost, Fortune?" said the telephone. "I hadn't noticed it." "Why?" "Because you don't speak till you're spoken to. Come and speak to me. I want comfort." The Honourable Sidney Lomas received Mr. Fortune with gentle irony. He supposed that Fortune had heard certain rumours of the existence of the Criminal Investigation Department. They were patient, modest people. They didn't want to worry anybody, but they did like to have a kind word sometimes. "What's the matter now? Has he come to life again?" said Mr. Fortune sharply. Lomas put tip his eyeglass. "You refer to Sir John Doughty, KB. Ah, you haven't forgotten our little troubles. How nice of you. No, our KB hasn't come to life. But he isn't at all quiet in his grave. Just look at this and this." He gave to Mr. Fortune 2 letters. In the first, which was long and used very beautiful language, the chief of the local police submitted that in view of the many suspicious circumstances about the death of Sir John Doughty, his body should be exhumed and examined by medical experts. In the second, which was short and forcible but without any beauty, the son of the late Sir John Doughty objected to the attempts of the police to make trouble about his father's death. He had heard with surprise and disgust that it was proposed to dig up the body. He wished to protest against this as a stupid outrage, an insult to the family. Temper or funk? Lomas smiled. "Well, you wouldn't expect a son to like his father exhumed," said Reggie. "He's natural enough." "Is he? He's been speeding up the redecoration of Mims Hall. He's going to give a housewarming party as soon as he can get the workmen out of the place. That's how he feels about his father's death." "Rather a thick skin," Reggie agreed. "Thick as a pig's. He is a pig in many ways, I hear. It seems to run in the family." "Yes, the old man wasn't what you'd call a Christian gentleman, but he had a right to die a natural death. That's our trouble." "Did he?" Reggie fidgeted. "I have no reason to say he didn't, Lomas. Thank heaven. I don't mind owning that I saw nothing in the case. If the fellow hadn't been a millionaire, nobody would have bothered about him. One law for the rich and another for the poor. Because the old ruffian was beastly wealthy, it's suspicious that he doesn't die in his bed with a specialist or two to kill him decently. I wasn't losing much sleep over Sir John Doughty, but this shakes me." He tapped the letter of John Doughty Jr. "When a son flies off the handle at a proposal to exhume his father, I begin to sit up and take notice." Reggie Fortune wriggled again. "What's the theory?" he groaned. "The only sound reason for digging up the body is that we don't believe in Dr. Ashton. But you want to dig it up because you don't like the son and heir. What is the theory, Lomas? That Dr. Ashton is a silly ass or that he is in collusion with the son?" "He might be both," Lomas smiled. "Oh, my head," said Mr. Fortune and held it. "You're full of ideas, Lomas. Try another. Dr. Ashton is very anxious the body should be exhumed. Good gad. Just so. He came to me, very lucid and rational, and said people were being nasty to him, so would I dig up the body please and have a look at it myself. Now what's the theory, Lomas?" "Did you say lucid, Reginald? And rational?" Lomas sighed. "That isn't how he strikes me. I gather you liked Dr. Enoch Ashton." "No, I wouldn't say that. A little too correct. A little too nervous about his reputation. But I didn't think he was bluffing. He was quite sure I shouldn't find anything he hadn't found." "Do you feel sure?" "I'm not sure of anything. There's a lot of dark background." "Suppose it was shock. Why did the man choose to have his shock at Mims Hall? He was generally somewhere else. What sort of thing would shock a tough old profiteer? It must have been something rather recherche, and if it wasn't shock it might have been anything. Anything, natural or unnatural, but Dr. Ashton must have done some bold lying. Oh, we'd better dig up the body. Lomas said, and he smiled. "A great chance for you, Reginald." "Why not do a little work yourself?" said Mr. Fortune with disgust. "Apply the trained intelligence of the detective. See if you can find out something about the past of the Doughtys. I've got it all from the cradle to the grave." Lomas tapped a pile of paper. "The Lancashire police have worked at the case like beavers, confound them, and there's nothing in all their stuff but that the man had a row with Dr. Ashton. They looked for what they expected and they found it. How like a policeman. Send Bell down. He has an open mind." So Superintendent Bell went to Lancashire, and the application for an exhumation order went to the Home Secretary, and Mr. Fortune went to look at his May tulips. Upon the third day, a trunk call from Scotland Yard brought him out of the garden above the river. He was told that John Doughty Jr. had been found dead in his room at Mims Hall. Mr. Doughty had given his house-warming party. 6 men were at Mims Hall. They kept it up late. Mr. Doughty did not come down in the morning. He did not answer when they called him. His door was locked. They broke it open. His body was quite cold. Taking his life and his license in his hands, Reggie Fortune's chauffeur brought the car to Euston in time for the noon express. Pale and dreamy, like a waking child, Reggie Fortune got out of the restaurant car in Manchester. It was looking its best. The streets were dry. The sun could be seen. But its beauties did not cheer Mr. Fortune. An ancient taxi wheezed away with him through miles of little grim houses, and he bounced from side to side in listless melancholy. He came out of the town into country devastated by tall chimneys, gaunt winding engines, and heaps of dingy rubble. But the river valley might have been beautiful before the water was black. He caught a glimpse of red rock over the river, and hills rose before him, flat-bosomed hills all much alike. The taxi groaned and grated, and swung away by a terribly new lodge of yellow brick into a park where among old and dying timber a host of saplings had been planted. Mr. Fortune put his hand to his eyes. An Elizabethan manor house stood up against him, red and raw. It was a place of pleasant design, but it had been scraped and pointed and restored till it looked like a mass of meat. No wonder he died of shock, Mr. Fortune groaned. The taxi stopped. Mr. Fortune sat still, gazing at the glaring house. Superintendent Bell came to the door. "Glad you've come, sir. Will you see the body at once?" "Yes, yes. Nothing inside can be worse than the outside." There are moments when Superintendent Bell does not understand Mr. Fortune. "Queer old place, sir, but it's a very queer business," he protested. "This way." The room in which John Doughty lay dead was large and of graceful proportions. It had been treated less brutally than the outside. The coat of arms on the ceiling was glittering with new paint. The oak panelling had been polished till it shone. But the room itself was still pleasant. The outrage there was the furniture, which flaunted red and gold lacquer. On the vast bed, on a quilt where crimson storks sported in wisteria, was John Doughty's body. "Dr. Ashton's seen him, sir, but he wouldn't touch him except to make sure he was dead. He said he had no idea how he died." "Somebody's touched him," Reggie frowned. "He wasn't found like this." "No, sir. When they broke the door in, they found him over there in the corner, sort of kneeling in a heap, they say, as if he died saying his prayers. But the bed had been slept in and the lights were out." Reggie looked down at the dead face. "God help us," he murmured, uncommon words for him. I shouldn't have said this man prayed much, for the face, though it was very pale, was cruel and coarse, the face of a man who let his appetites rule him, and had some evil appetites. "No, sir," Bell agreed gravely. "I can't think so. Worse than his father, that's his reputation. And no one has a good word to say for the old man. On his knees in the corner, and he'd been in bed," Reggie murmured, and bent over the body. "A queer way to die." He covered the body again and stood up and frowned at it. "What do you say, sir?" Bell asked at last. "I say nothing." "Nothing?" Bell was startled. "Beg pardon, sir, but did you see that?" He lifted the dead hand. Round the wrist was a purple line. Same on the other too. Thank you. I can see, said Mr. Fortune with unwanted acidity. Beg pardon, sir. I thought it might have been a struggle. Somebody gripped him. Held his wrists so tight that he died. Unusual cause of death. And those lines weren't made by anybody's hands. Did somebody tie his wrists so tight it killed him? Also unusual. Tie him so he couldn't struggle and kill him some way that left no other marks? That isn't common either. And then your somebody went out leaving the door locked on the inside. Ingenious fellow. Well, sir, we've only the word of these fellows that found him the key was on the inside. Mr. Fortune stared at him. That is so. Something possible at last, even reasonable. I beg your pardon, Bell. My mind isn't working. We don't know anything but what we've been told. Very depressing. He shrugged his shoulders and shivered and walked to the window. Nobody could have got in that way, sir. Nobody but a small child, said Bell. For the big bow window opened only in little casements. Reggie looked out at the new gravel of the drive and the new patchwork turf and the new flower beds full of geraniums and calceolarias, and shuddered and wandered away to the corner where the dead man had been found. There was no mark on the carpet, none on the polished panelling. Very depressing, he murmured, and started round. I can't do anything here, he said sharply. Have the body taken somewhere I can examine it. Come on, I'll tell Inspector Barton. He's in charge here, sir. Bell opened the door, but Reggie stopped on the threshold. I want that door sealed, he said. The superintendent pointed to a policeman in a chair on the landing. When the body's gone, seal the door, Reggie said sharply. Now, what about these fellows who told the tale? Inspector Barton was a little man who had the speech of Manchester and a pugnacious self-confidence. He had established himself in the morning room and was tapping out his report on a little typewriter, a page a minute. Hallo, doctor, done your job? His fingers paused a moment. What's it come to? Superintendent Bell, scandalized at this manner of dealing with his Mr. Fortune, said they couldn't take the matter like that, and the inspector would kindly give instructions to remove the body to a mortuary where a complete investigation could be made, and then have the room sealed up. The inspector bounced out of his chair and did so, and the heavy tread of constabulary made Mims Hall creak. The inspector came back again. Don't want to commit yourself, doctor? He grinned and tapped away at his typewriter. Safety first, eh? That's all right. I've got some things myself want sifting, but I reckon we'll do best working together. Have you got any ideas you could tell me without prejudice? The typewriter clacked on. I could tell you to stop that noise, said Mr. Fortune sadly. Just drop that, Barton. Bell frowned. Mr. Fortune wants your attention. Who were these fellows in the house? Inspector Barton bore no malice. This seemed to be the way to treat him. He reeled off a list and short biographies of the house party. They were 6, 4 of them business friends of John Doughty, men of his own sort, well known, money to burn, hard cases all, nothing against them. Inspector Barton winked. They wouldn't stick at a trifle in business, sport, or with women, but plain crime wasn't in their way. Much too shrewd. It isn't a plain crime, said Bell. No, a lot of background, Reggie murmured. Any background to these fellows, Ellen Inspector? I tell you, we know all about 'em. Nothing queer. Nothing you don't expect with that kind of sportsman. I reckon you can rule them out. How did they take the death? Pretty tough they are. More angry than sorry, if you know what I mean. Seemed to think it was a shabby trick of Doughty to bring them out here, so he could die with them in the house. They cleared off quick. We know where to find 'em if we want 'em. I've got their evidence. It don't amount to anything. Big dinner last night. Doughty did 'em proud. They kept it up late, plenty of liquor going. And they don't remember any more till the morning. That's 4 out of 6. What about the other 2? Said Reggie. Now you're getting warmer, Doctor. They were employees. There was Doughty's secretary, Sandbach, shriveled old stick come down in. The world. He had a big business of his own once, broke in the war. The Doughties bought it for a song. Young Doughty took him on, partly because he knows the ropes, partly to make a butt of him. He liked to have someone about him to bully, did Doughty. And then there was Kiddlin, a youngish fellow, a chemist the Doughties used as a technical expert. He was in trouble over a woman, remember the St. Helens child murder? He got clear by the skin of his teeth. His firm chucked him and the Doughties picked him up cheap. No better brains at his job, they say, but decent people wouldn't employ him. The Doughties used him in some of the dirtiest business. They were a genial family, the Doughties, said Reggie. Inspector Barton laughed. I reckon there's not many crying over 'em. He cocked his eye at Bell. Wonder if they caught a tartar when they caught Mr. Kiddlin, the chemist. Poor devil, said Reggie. Kiddlin did some fine work once. Oh, before he went tinder, Inspector Barton grinned. Before he went into business, Reggie corrected him. Poor devil. He gave up research for a factory and a fat salary. Then he went to the dogs. Then he went to the Doughties. Poor devil. I didn't take to Mr. Kiddlin myself, Inspector Barton sniffed. But it's quite right he had no jam with the Doughties, no more than old Sandbach. Well, I was saying, you're getting warm, Doctor. This last night here was pretty wet. When they got merry, they were ragging Kiddlin and Sandbach. I reckon that's what Doughty had the beggars here for. Made 'em sing, made 'em dance, chivied 'em. There was a lot of noise, the servants say. And then everybody got to bed, and the valet found Doughty's door locked in the morning. Have you got anything more about the valet? Bell said. It turns on him to my mind. He's the evidence the door was locked and the key inside. You heard him. He sounded straight. He hasn't been long with Doughty. I got his last character over the telephone. Quite all right. We'll look him up, of course. But I don't see anything against him. Like to see Mr. Kiddlin, Doctor? Yes, let's get that over, said Reggie. Mr. Kiddlin came, a wisp of a man with a big head and a nervous manner. My name's Fortune, Mr. Kiddlin, Reggie said gently. I want to know if you can help me in this case. Mr. Fortune, I am very glad. A smile passed over the thin, pale lips. Now that you take the case, everything will be done for poor Mr. Doughty, Reggie frowned. You knew him well, Mr. Kiddlin. I wonder if you can think of any cause for his sudden death. There was much in Mr. Doughty's life that I did not know. He worked very hard. He was fond of pleasure. Sometimes nature exacts a penalty. I can only think that. But I am not a doctor. Reggie Fortune still frowned. You're a man of science, Mr. Kiddlin. Does nothing else occur to you? I am a doctor, and I'm not satisfied. I am only a chemist. Mr. Kiddlin spread out his hands. It does not help, I know nothing. Mr. Doughty was full of vigor last night, and this morning dead. Some ragging last night, wasn't there? Inspector Barton broke in. You didn't tell me that. I had to get it from the servants. Doughty ragged you. Mr. Kiddlin laughed nervously. Ragging? But it was nothing. There was some noise, perhaps. Mr. Doughty was jovial, very jovial. It was his way. Did I not tell you? I did not think of it. It happened so often. Oh, he often ragged you, did he? Barton glared. When we were in high spirits, there was often good fun. The little man squirmed. It was very pleasant with Mr. Doughty. When he rolled you downstairs, Barton glared. No, he did not. It was only fun. The little man protested miserably. We need not trouble Mr. Kiddlin any further, Inspector, said Reggie Fortune with decision, and Mr. Kiddlin bowed his way out. Little rat, isn't he? Barton grinned. You know you'd frighten me, Barton, Bell said. Yes, he was afraid, Reggie murmured, and that was an ugly case at St. Helens. He sighed. Well, what about the other man? Mr. Sandbach was a tall, bent old fellow, whose clothes and skin hung loosely. He had really nothing to say which he had not told Inspector Barton, and his hands plucked at his knees. Mr. Doughty hadn't been ill in any way, Reggie asked. No, Mr. Doughty had quite good health, A bad head now and then, of course. Mr. Doughty was rather fond of pleasure, you see. Had he any enemies, Mr. Sandbach? Mr. Sandbach was of a sallow grey colour. He could not turn pale, but the grey became greenish. No, indeed. That is to say, he had his disagreements in business, but no personal feeling, none at all. Mr. Sandbach licked his lips. Everyone liked him. There was silence for a long minute. Then Reggie said, "Can you tell me anything about this ragging last night?" "Ragging?" Mr. Sandbach echoed. "But there was nothing. A little fun. We were all very merry. We made a deal of noise. Mr. Doughty was in great spirits. What did he do to you?" Inspector Barton broke in. "Do to me? I don't understand. We were all jolly together. Mr. Doughty has always treated me a friend. I was only his secretary, of course, but he was very kind and made things very easy and pleasant. Pleasant for Kiddlin too, weren't they?" Barton sneered. "Why, really, of course I couldn't speak for Mr. Kiddlin, I think so. I hope so. I believe Mr. Kiddlin was quite devoted." Again there was silence. "Have you told me everything?" Reggie said sadly. "You were all very jolly and happy, then you went to bed, and John Doughty died in the night. You can't add anything to that at all." Mr. Sandbach looked at him with a curious earnestness, as though trying to discover what he meant. "No, really. I don't think I can, sir." "Did you hear anything in the night?" Reggie said quickly. Mr. Sandbach's hands clenched on his knees. I did fancy I heard a sort of a cry, but I'm not sure, you see. I hardly like to mention it. Did it wake you?" "I'm sure I couldn't say. I may only have been dreaming. It's all very vague to me." "What time was it?" "Well, there again I couldn't say. Everything was dark, I'm sure, but it's all confused in my mind." "It seems to be," said Barton. "You'd better be frank with us, Mr. Sandbach." "But I'm trying to be. Indeed I am, sir. I shouldn't wonder if you have to try again." "That'll do, Barton," said Bell, watching his Mr. Fortune. "I won't keep you any longer now, Mr. Sandbach," Reggie said. "Try to make sure what you really know." And Mr. Sandbach slunk out, twisting his hands. "He's in a deadly funk." Barton grinned. "If I'd put him through it, I believe I could have made the old liar confess." "I dare say you could," said Bell, "but this is England." "Yes, he'd confess something." "That's what I was afraid of," said Mr. Fortune. "It might be quite awkward, Inspector. The case is complicated enough already." Inspector Barton stared at him with an expression of contempt. "Well, I'm no medical expert doctor," he began, and there was a tap at the door and a woman came in. She was tall and stately in her plain black. Her dark face and white hair made a handsome head. She wished to know if the gentleman was staying the night. "No, thank you," said Reggie with decision. She bowed and went out again. "Who in wonder is that?" "The housekeeper, Mrs. Hearn." "Hearn? Gipsy name." "I dare say. Lived here 30 years. Housekeeper with old Colonel Stott. Then kind of caretaker. The Doughtys kept her on. I was saying, Doctor, I'm no medical expert, but I reckon these two fellows, Kiddlin and Sandbach, they know something, and the sooner they confess the better." "I wonder," Reggie said dreamily, "what a man confesses isn't always what he knows. Good night." The wheezy taxicab bore Bell and him back to Manchester. "That's a terrible fellow," Mr. Fortune murmured. "Slapdash, sir. Very useful under orders. Lot of go. No head for the big stuff. He frightens me. I'm all of a dither still. He has a head all right. But no heart, Bell, no heart. He'll be hanging these poor wretches before we know where we are." "I didn't take to Kiddlin myself," Bell admitted. "Nasty rat of a man. I was sorry for the old fellow, but he was lying, sir." I know. Broken men." Reggie shivered. "A depressing case, Belt." The cab jotted on through the dark. After a while, Mr. Fortune spoke again wearily. "Remains the body, the new body, this body. Make Dr. Ashton come and go over this body with me." In the morning, Dr. Ashton came. When the investigation was over, The two men left the mortuary in silence and reached Reggie's rooms in the hotel silent still. Then Reggie took up the telephone and asked for the head waiter and cocktails. "I beg pardon, not for me," said Dr. Ashton. "If it's not too much trouble, just a strong cup of tea." Reggie Fortune was in the middle of a conference about a chicken salad. He faltered. He gazed with horror at Dr. Ashton. "My dear fellow, oh my dear fellow," he protested. "Comfort is what we need. I couldn't eat anything, thank you. You know, I'm not used to this sort of thing, Mr. Fortune." "Nor am I," said Reggie, and continued his conference on salad with a few remarks on white wines. They brought the cocktails and the tea, the cold soup and the chicken, and Dr. Ashton somberly watched Reggie eat. "You let it worry you rather, don't you?" Reggie slid into an easy chair and lit a cigar. "I suppose you believe me now," said Dr. Ashton. "This case is precisely like the other." "No blood in heart or brain," Reggie murmured. "All the symptoms of shock, but no trace of a wound or a blow, just what you said you found in the father." "Oh, you'd better look at the father's body, too. I don't suppose you missed anything. This is what you said. 2 incredible deaths from shock. The only difference is the superficial marks. Red pattern of veins in the father, such as a lightning or heat stroke produces, purple bands in the sun, such as might be produced by a cord. But there was no lightning, and we can't find any cord." "What shocked him, Doctor?" Ashton shook his head. "It's altogether outside my experience, Mr. Fortune. I suppose there is none of the obscure alkaloid poisons which could produce these effects. Nothing that's known. I could do an analysis, of course. I wouldn't know what to look for." "That's natural death again, then," Dr. Ashton said. "I'm very glad it's you who have to say so and not me." "I haven't said so, not yet. Why did they never have a shock till they came to Mims Hall? What was the new factor that began to work in their lives at Mims Hall?" Dr. Ashton lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "You think it was someone at Mims?" "Why, young Doughty had hardly ever been at Mims till the other day. I'd never seen him till I saw him dead." "But he also came to Mims Hall to die. Did anyone at Mims know them before they came?" Dr. Ashton had never heard of it. Well. Are you going back now?" "I wish you'd show me the place in the park where the old man was found." The car stopped by the Yellow Lodge. Dr. Ashton led the way over the coarse, tufted grass to a footpath which crossed the park from the house to the village. Close by it was a circle of green bank. "Just where he was found," the doctor said. "What is this?" "They say it's a Roman camp." No. It might be a ring for bull baiting. Village close by. Sports of the good old times, I think. And this is where Sir John Doughty had his shock. When I was brought to him, he lay there in the middle in a heap. Reggie went delicately. "Here by this stump?" he said. "Yes, I should say so," Dr. Ashton considered. "I don't remember the stump, but it was hereabouts." Reggie was down on his hands and knees. "But it's a very interesting stump," he murmured. "It was not the remains of a tree, but of a stout piece of timber driven into the ground. The top, nearly level with the ground, was hard and black." Well, Reggie stood up. "By the way, do you know anything of the servants at the hall?" "They're all new except Mrs. Hearn. She was housekeeper years ago in the old colonel's time. She stayed on looking after the place when it was empty, and Doughty took her over with it. Her people have been in Mims for generations." "Her people still here?" "No, there's only herself and her son that I know of. She owns a cottage or two in Mims. He's in a house agent's firm in Manchester. I believe he put Sir John Doughty on to buying the old place." "Did he, though?" Mr. Fortune murmured. "Queer old stump, isn't it?" He looked down at it again. He looked about him. He paced to and fro. "I say, Doctor, did it ever occur to you this is rather a ghastly place?" "God bless my soul!" Dr. Ashton cried. "You startled me, Mr. Fortune. Of course these associations are unpleasant." Yes, quite so." Mr. Fortune shivered. "Well, I'll go up to the house. Thanks very much." It seemed to Dr. Ashton that Mr. Fortune was feeling the strain. He was not surprised. He felt it himself. Mr. Fortune made for the house at 5 miles an hour. He found Inspector Barton in conference with Superintendent Bell. Anything new? Hoping for that from you, Doctor. Barton grinned. We've been through the servants, sir. 1 or 2 points, Bell said. Seen Mrs. Hearn? Did you ask her if her son had been here lately? Barton stared. Well now, where did you get that, sir? He said in a humbler tone. Yes, Jack Hearn was here on the night of the death, and we didn't get that out of his mother till we had it from the valet, said Bell. She's close. Was he down here on the day of the other death? Said Reggie. The Hearns? My God, said Barton. Beg pardon, sir. Hut, what put you on to them? Look after it, Bell, said Reggie. I want you, Barton. I'm going upstairs. Yes, sir. I'll go with you myself. No, you'll stay outside. Reggie strode out. My oath, he's keen, Barton muttered. Makes you feel a fool, doesn't he? Bell smiled. But the brisk and confident manner of Mr. Fortune did not last long. He broke the seals on the bedroom door. He said over his shoulder to Barton, You stay there till I come out. Don't you let anybody in. He shut the door in Barton's face, and then he wandered about the big room, fidgeting with a chair here and a curtain there in a vague and futile manner. He caught a glimpse of himself in the glass and stopped and spent some time smoothing his smooth hair and examining the unusual pallor of his chubby face. The money and the pocket-knife and the keys of John Doughty were still on the dressing table. His clothes lay in a heap on a chair by the bed. Yes, he stood here, Reggie murmured. He went over there and undressed. Reggie followed the dead man's footsteps. He got into bed. He put out the light. He lay there in the dark. And then how did the Hearnes get at him, and what did they do? Reggie sat down on the bed and shivered. There would be just the firelight flickering in the dark. Yes, it was a big fire. He glanced at the ashes. Flames reflected in that shining paneling. Just a crackle of burning. That's what he saw. That's what he heard. And then there was a cry in the night, and he was out of bed kneeling in the corner. And he was dead. How did the Hearnes get him out of bed, and why did they take him over there? Reggie pulled the bedclothes to the ground, ran his hands over the bare bedstead, dragged it out into the middle of the room, and examined the wall and the floor where it had stood. He rose breathless and wiped the sweat from his face. My God, and I'm cold, he muttered. I'm cold. This isn't natural. The family of Hearn annoys me. How did they get at him? What is the trick of this room? He wandered to the fireplace. The vast old chimney had Ken narrowed for a modem grate, and the new work was solid. He began to feel the panelling, and on a sudden made off to the corner where John Doughty died. Well, well. This isn't systematic, he protested to himself. This is futile. But to the corner he went. Why did I do that, he said. What am I doing? He steadied himself against the panelling. Yes, it was here, he cried, and felt cold come over him like a wave. He stumbled away into the middle of the room, breathing hard and shivering. Me too? He gasped. I think not. He made a dash for the door and tumbled into the arms of Inspector Barton. Hold up, Doctor, that brisk little man cried. Feeling queer. Steady now. What'll I get you? Like a drop of whiskey. Reggie held him tight. One moment. You're nice and natural, Inspector, he said unsteadily. What I really want is a 2-foot rule. Inspector Barton, with the smile of a man who is never found wanting, produced a spring measure. Come into the next room. By the way, who slept in the next room? No one. But it's a very nice room. Measure it along the outer wall. Good. Come into the corridor. Measure the length of the 2 rooms. Now for it. They went into the room of death, and Reggie bit his lip. Right up into the corner. Along the outer wall. Reggie kept close to his elbow as he measured. And that's that, Reggie murmured. Come away. 6 feet or more short, Barton cried. That partition wall is never 6 feet thick. 6 feet of something in the wall. Reggie drew him out. Seal the room again, Barton." He went slowly downstairs to find Superintendent Bell examining Mrs. Hearn. She was calmly mistress of herself and the situation. "Mrs. Hearn can't remember whether her son was at Mims on the day Sir John Doughty died, sir," Bell said. "That's a pity," Reggie murmured. "He often comes out to see me. He has his motor bicycle," said Mrs. Hearn placidly. "I expect him tonight, sir, if you would like to ask him anything." "I should, but I dare say you can tell me why it was no one was put in the room next to Mr. Doughty's the night he died." Mrs. Hearn had no difficulty. "We have a number of better rooms, sir. There was no need to use it." "I suppose it really wasn't used?" "No, sir, not to my knowledge. I don't understand." "When was Mr. Doughty's used before?" "I couldn't say, sir. It was the first time Mr. Doughty had slept here. The builders have only just finished with the house, you see, and before that it was empty for many years. But you were here when it was occupied. I suppose nothing unpleasant ever happened in the room?" "No, sir, not in my time. The sound of a motor bicycle was heard." "That is my son, I think." Mrs. Hearn went out. "Hard as nails, sir," Bell said, "and as shrewd as they make 'em. I've got nothing." Mr. Hearn was not as majestic a person as his mother, even darker of face and more plainly of gypsy blood. "My mother tells me you gentlemen want to know if I was out here the day Sir John died." He smiled. "I was. I came over about this time." "You didn't see him?" Bell asked. "No, I had tea with Mother, and went back before he was found." "There was one thing I wanted to ask you, Mr. Hearn," Reggie murmured. "Why did you suggest to Sir John that he should buy Mims Hall?" Mr. Hearn smiled. "Well, that's pretty obvious, isn't it, sir? He was a man who could pay a price. My firm had the place on their books. It was good business for me. And between ourselves, Mims Hall is rather a white elephant nowadays. You'd have to get a man specially interested to buy it. Well, John Doughty was the man. His family built the place and lost it. It seemed natural when he'd made the Doughty fortune again he should come back. Your family have been in Mims a long time, haven't they?" Mr. Hearn laughed. "Well, we think so. I believe we were here in the old days when the Doughtys owned everything and everybody, but of course, we were only village people. And you wanted to see the old family restored to its ancient home." "Oh, well, I don't know." Mr. Hearn had lost something of his assurance. "That's sentiment, isn't it? I'm a businessman, sir." Yes, it was rather bad business for the Doughtys." "Not my fault, was it?" Mr. Hearn said sharply. "I didn't get their money, sir. Mims Hall wasn't mine." "No, but the family of Doughty hasn't much luck here." Mr. Hearn scowled. "They had a merry time here in the old days." Yes, that's all, Mr. Hearn," Reggie murmured. "And when he was gone, sly fellow," Bell said. "But there's nothing to get hold of, sir, is there?" "He hated 'em well," Reggie said. "What we want now, Bell, is a competent housebreaker. Do you think they have such a thing in Manchester?" On the next morning, 2 grizzled experts in dealing with old houses inspected the panelling of the best bedroom. They could find no part made to move. They took down a section of it in the corner. What they revealed was another panelled wall, unpolished, with less caning, worm-eaten. "Well, I'm damned," said Inspector Barton. "Like one of those nests of boxes, this is." One of the workmen tapped the panelling. "The real goods, governor. The others sound old stuff, but this is proper antique." "I know. As old as the house." "The others a good century later," Reggie said. "Have this down too, governor?" The other man was running his hands over it. "Half a moment. Here's a hinge, Bill. I take my oath." They used their tools delicately. A narrow door creaked out of the panelling and opened inwards with a groan. "Here, my God, what's this?" The 2 workmen shrank back. The door opened into a little panelled chamber. Bound to a nail in the panelling by a cord hung 2 bones. Reggie drew a deep breath and went in. There was something on the floor, pieces of dusty fabric, more bones, a skull. Reggie had the skull in his hand when Bell came to him. "What is it, sir?" "A woman, a young woman. Those are the bones of the forearms tied to the wall. I think she was hurt in here. They look like bloodstains on the wall there. Flogged, perhaps. And they shut her up in here in this secret room to die. Nice family, the Doughties. When would that be, sir? Before the 17th century panelling was put up, say about 1670. He bent down, arranging the tumbled bones till the skeleton lay in order on the floor. God give you rest, he muttered, and turned away. Mrs. Hearn was making herself busy in the corridor outside the bedroom. Reggie pointed her downstairs. In the morning room he turned upon her. Did you know what we were going to find, Mrs. Hearn? Mrs. Hearn, quite composed, had no idea what he had found. In the wall of Mr. Doughty's bedroom, there was a secret room, and in that room, a young woman, skeleton. Mrs. Hearn said calmly that it must have been there a long while, 200 years and more. Mrs. Hearn said that must have been in the days of the old Doughtys. Yes. Do you know how it came there? Mrs. Hearn, with a faint smile, said that was before her time. You never heard any stories about those days? Mrs. Hearn said she was no scholar. It was at this point that Mr. Sandbach broke into the room. He was much agitated. Sir, Mr. Fortune, is this true? You found another body upstairs. It's only a skeleton, Mr. Sandbach, said Mrs. Hearn. For the second and last time in their acquaintance, Reggie saw her smile. Thank God, Mr. Sandbach gasped and sat down heavily. Mrs. Hearn asked if there was anything else, and Reggie waved her away. Now, Mr. Sandbach, you didn't tell me all you knew before, Reggie said gravely. Why do you come to me now? I was afraid, said Mr. Sandbach. I wasn't sure. I thought perhaps poor Kiddlin, now I know. It was the act of God, Mr. Fortune, the vengeance of God, unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, you know. I don't know, said Reggie, but I think you know how that skeleton came there. Oh, yes, Mr. Sandbach agreed. He seemed quite placid and even happy. The story is in a broadside of Queen Anne's time. We had it in our library. A very strange piece. Quick into Hell, it was called. In the reign of Charles II, John Doughty, who was the squire here, tried to get hold of a girl in the village, Sarah Hearn. Her mother was a widow. The two of them resisted him. He gave out that the old woman was a witch and persecuted her, and at last had her burnt for a witch in the village bull ring. Then he took the girl off to the hall, and she was never seen again. It was believed that he flogged her to death because she resisted him, but soon after John Doughty was gored to death by a bull that got loose at a bull baiting, and his son lost the whole estate at the gaming table and died begging at tavern doors. That is the story, sir. Mr. Sandbach smiled. There has been no Doughty at Mims Holt from then till now. You knew all this when John Doughty bought the place the other day? I didn't know how much of it was true, Mr. Fortune. You didn't try to stop them? Why should I? Mr. Sandbach said slowly. Mr. Fortune, if you knew anything of them, you wouldn't have tried to stop them. Do you mean that you thought something would happen to them here? How could I know? We are all in the hand of God, Mr. Fortune. How do you think they died? By the vengeance of God, sir. When he was gone. That's all very well, sir, Bell protested. I believe in God too, but not his God. What killed 'em? The ghosts of women that their ancestors burnt to death and flogged to death. That's too much for me. Yet one is found where the mother was burnt, and there are marks on his flesh such as a heat stroke would make, and the other is found where the daughter was tied up for flogging, and there are cord marks on his wrists. What, Mr. Fortune? You don't believe in ghosts, and ghosts that can kill? Believe? There's more things happen than I believe in, Bell. Can a spirit haunt a place? I don't know. Places where dead people have borne agonies may be somehow affected so that they hurt us. Haven't you ever felt that? What is it that produces shock? Grief sometimes, horror, fear, not anything done to the body. Suppose there is an influence, a force here where these women were tortured. I felt something queer striking at me when I was shut up in that bedroom trying to find evidence against the Hearns. The Doughtys, brutes like their ancestors, came here where the ghosts, the memories, the power whatever it is, could get at them. Here, where the Hernes were, knowing it all, thinking of it, hating all the doughty blood, old Sandbach too, his mind set on it, and some ghastly pain of the old torture strikes first the father, then the son. You know how a horrible fancy sometimes comes into the mind. It's real and worse for a moment. The father came by the stake where the mother was burnt and felt himself burning. The son lay where the daughter had been flogged, dreamed of it perhaps, and her pain came to him. Shock, what the old man called the act of God. That's a pretty awful idea, sir. Yes. Not much mercy for them, was there, in the end? Bell shuddered. I reckon it's the merciful that get mercy, he said. And we're policemen. What's our chance? End of Tile Profiteers. End of Mr. Fortune's Trials by H.C. Bailey.